I have a hard time with that whole, better use another adjective. I have a difficult time looking. I think he's doing some good things. Mostly, he's acting on his instincts, which are not good.
Burt Reynolds. The name itself brings back an entire era. That charming mustachioed grin, the infectious laugh. For a while, he wasn't just a movie star, he was Hollywood. For 5 straight years, from 1978 to 1982, he was the #1 box office draw in America, a record-setting run of popularity that cemented his status as an icon. He had a charisma that felt less like acting and more like he was just letting you in on the fun. He was the guy every man wanted to be and every woman wanted to be with. But that's the public story. Behind the famous grin, there was a whole other narrative brewing. For decades, Reynolds wrestled with professional jealousies, artistic disagreements, and what seemed like genuine contempt for some of Tinseltown's biggest names. And that brings us to a persistent internet legend, a rumor whispered in forums and spread through viral videos. The story goes that just before he passed away in 2018, Burt Reynolds made a final secret list, a burn book from beyond the grave, naming the 6 actors he truly despised. Now let's be clear, no physical list has ever been found or verified by his family. But the rumor sticks around because it feels true to the kind of man Burt was. He was famously candid, often to his own career's detriment, and he never, ever shied away from a good feud. So today, we're separating fact from fiction. We're diving into the well-documented rivalries and shocking on-set clashes that fueled this Hollywood legend. You won't believe who is rumored to be at the top of this list. Think on-screen chemistry means everyone's best friends when the cameras stop. Rolling? Think again. What if the biggest star of the 70s was also his own worst enemy? Burt Reynolds wasn't just an actor. He was a cultural phenomenon. But for all his success, he was haunted by the feeling of being critically disrespected. He'd watch actors with a fraction of his box office appeal get praised as geniuses, while he was often written off as just a good old boy in a fast car. That feeling simmered for years, erupting in public spats and private resentments. This isn't just a story about who he disliked. It's the story of a man's battle with his own image, a battle that would define his legacy and give birth to the legend of his infamous list. Coming in at number 6 on this rumored list is an actor who seemed to represent everything Burt Reynolds wasn't. Ryan O'Neal. Theirs wasn't a feud of dramatic explosions, but more of a cold war of professional resentment that simmered through the 1970s when both men were at the height of their fame. You have to picture the Hollywood landscape. Both Reynolds and O'Neal were handsome, charming leading men, and they were often up for the same kinds of roles. They even co-starred as rivals in the 1976 film Nickelodeon. But in Burt's eyes, the similarities were only skin deep. Reynolds saw himself as a rugged, authentic man's man, a former stuntman who brought real-life grit to the screen. He saw O'Neal as a pretty boy, an actor who, from his perspective, coasted on his looks without having what Burt considered real substance. The flashpoint seems to have been the 1970 mega-hit, Love Story. The film turned Ryan O'Neal into a global superstar and earned him an Oscar nomination. Reynolds, who prided himself on his box office power, reportedly viewed the film with a mix of disdain and pure professional jealousy. To him, Love Story was sappy schmaltz, yet the world fell head over heels for it. That was a bitter pill to swallow. According to Hollywood lore, Burt just couldn't understand how O'Neal's performance became a phenomenon, while his own, more demanding work in films, like Deliverance, was often dismissed by critics as just popular entertainment. While there are no documented screaming matches, this rivalry was about a fundamental disagreement over what it meant to be a movie star. Reynolds believed stardom was earned with sweat, stunts, and a connection to the audience. He seemed to feel O'Neal represented a shortcut, where looking the part was more important than feeling it. This perception of unearned success is what likely landed Ryan O'Neal a permanent spot on Reynolds' list of Hollywood grievances. At number 5, we find a conflict that was less about a personal grudge and more about a clash of ideologies: Burt. Reynolds' disdain for Dustin Hoffman represented a war between two schools of thought in 1970s Hollywood: populist entertainment versus serious intellectual artistry. Burt was the king of entertainment. He believed a movie's first job was to give people a good time. Hoffman, in Burt's eyes, was the high priest of the method, an actor who seemed to treat every role like a public therapy session. Reynolds built his entire persona on seeming effortless. The charm, the humor, the swagger, it all looked completely natural. He famously believed that if the audience could see the work, the actor had failed. Hoffman was the polar opposite. His process was famously intense, involving deep psychological preparation and on-set perfectionism. To Reynolds, this wasn't acting, it was navel-gazing. He felt that this intense, mumbling style of performance was a betrayal of the audience. In his world, movies were an escape, not homework. This wasn't just an abstract debate for Burt, it was personal. He was haunted by the iconic roles he'd turned down, parts that often went to actors like Hoffman or Jack Nicholson. He famously regretted passing on the role of Garrett Breedlove in Terms of Endearment, which won Jack Nicholson an Oscar. "I regret that one most of all," Reynolds later said, "because it was a real acting part." He was also considered for roles in classics, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Seeing actors like Hoffman get showered with awards for a style of acting he found pretentious was a constant source of frustration. This deep, ideological rift is why Dustin Hoffman secured his place on Burt's rumored list of actors he just didn't get. This next feud was anything but secret. The animosity between Burt Reynolds and Kathleen Turner on the set of the 1988 comedy Switching Channels is a legendary Hollywood disaster. This wasn't a Cold War. This was an all-out hot war, fought with insults traded like machine gun fire, that echoed for 30 years. The trouble started before Burt was even cast. The role was supposed to go to Michael Caine, and Turner was thrilled. But when Caine had to drop out, Reynolds was brought in as a last-minute replacement. According to Turner, the set became a tinderbox from day one. In a 2018 interview, she recalled the experience vividly. "Working with Burt Reynolds was terrible," she said. Turner claimed that on the first day, Reynolds made a comment implying he wasn't happy taking second billing to a woman, which left her in tears. "It never occurred to me that I wasn't someone's equal," she said. That moment set the tone for the entire shoot. Their on-screen relationship was supposed to be a fiery screwball romance, but the off-screen hostility was so real, it practically melted the camera. Their co-star, Christopher Reeve, later wrote that he felt like a referee trying to keep them apart. The film ultimately bombed, and the feud didn't end there. For the next 3 decades, they continued to trade barbs in the press. In 2018, shortly before his death, Reynolds appeared on Watch What Happens Live. When asked to name the most overrated actor of the 70s and 80s, he didn't miss a beat: Kathleen Turner. Turner gave as good as she got, appearing on the same show and confirming he was a terrible on-screen kiss. Their battle was a clash of egos from different eras. Reynolds, the old-school megastar whose power was fading, and Turner, the empowered new star of the 80s who refused to be intimidated. It was more than a personality clash. It was a symbol of a changing Hollywood, and it earned Kathleen Turner a very well-documented spot on Burt's list of enemies. At number 3 is perhaps the most ironic conflict of Burt's entire career: his relationship with director Paul Thomas Anderson on the set of 1997's Boogie Nights was famously toxic. Reynolds hated the experience, despised the subject matter, and for years refused to even watch the movie. And yet, this tortured production would earn him his only Oscar nomination and a Golden Globe Award, resurrecting his career and giving him the critical respect he'd chased for decades. From the start, Reynolds wanted nothing to do with it. He reportedly turned down the role of porn director Jack Horner multiple times, deeply uncomfortable with the film's setting. He eventually took the part, but his bad feelings turned into open hostility on set. The core of the problem was a clash between an old-school movie star and a young, cocky director. Anderson was just 26, brimming with artistic vision. Reynolds, who had been the biggest star in the world, saw Anderson's confidence as pure arrogance. The tension just kept escalating. Reynolds felt Anderson ignored his experience and wouldn't allow for the kind of improvisation he was used to. The conflict got so bad that Reynolds later admitted on Conan O'Brien's show, "I wanted to hit him." He was so angry by the end of it that he reportedly fired his agent for pushing him to take the role. Even after Boogie Nights became a critical sensation, he remained unimpressed, famously using his Golden Globes acceptance speech to thank everyone but his director. This feud is the perfect summary of Burt Reynolds' career tragedy. He was a man who desperately wanted to be seen as a serious actor. Yet when that golden opportunity finally arrived, packaged in a brilliant, challenging film, he couldn't see past his own ego and discomfort. He fought against the very project that gave him his greatest artistic triumph, which is why Paul Thomas Anderson is ranked so high on the list of people Burt Reynolds just couldn't stand, just missing the top spot. Jon Voight, on the other hand, was a disciplined method actor from the New York stage. His approach was meticulous, analytical, and internal. He would dissect scenes and endlessly explore a character's emotional state. To Reynolds, this wasn't acting. It was work. It's a sentiment he expressed many times in his life. "I always believed that if the audience could see you acting, you were doing it wrong." While they remained professional, there was a clear friction between them. Reynolds saw Voight's intellectual process as fussy, while Voight likely saw Burt's approach as more superficial. The characters they played perfectly mirrored this dynamic. Reynolds was the man of action, and Voight was the man of thought who is forced to become a killer. Unlike his other feuds, this one never spilled into public insults. But for Reynolds, Voight, much like Hoffman, represented a school of acting he simply couldn't respect, one that celebrated the actor's visible effort over the character's seamless reality. This deep philosophical divide is what earns Jon Voight his place near the top of this legendary list. And here we are, at number 1. The feud that haunted Burt Reynolds for his entire career. A one-sided obsession rooted in professional jealousy and a bizarre sense of rejection. The man who holds the undisputed top spot on Reynolds' rumored hate list was the one actor he could never escape, Marlon Brando. The saga started early. As a young actor, Burt, with his dark features and smoldering intensity, was constantly told he looked like a young Brando. What should have been a compliment became a curse. He was even turned down for a role in the film Sayonara because the director thought he looked too much like its star, Marlon Brando. In a desperate attempt to create his own identity, Reynolds grew his signature mustache. The most legendary chapter of their non-relationship revolves around The Godfather. The story, which Reynolds himself helped spread, is that he was a top contender for the role of Sonny Corleone. But Brando, already cast as Vito, allegedly threatened to quit if the TV actor who looked like him was hired. Whether it's entirely true or not, the story became Hollywood legend. When asked about it years later, Reynolds said he was flattered, that he was upset. Why the animosity from Brando? Some say Brando was insecure. Others point to a 1963 episode of The Twilight Zone, where a young Reynolds played a satirical Brando-esque method actor, a parody Brando supposedly never forgave. Whatever the reason, Brando's dismissal was absolute. Reynolds once recalled finally meeting his idol. He told Brando he was the finest actor in the world. According to the popular, though maybe too good to be true story, Brando's cold reply was, "I wish I could say the same for you." That sting lingered. To be so thoroughly rejected by his hero was a wound that never quite healed. This epic, one-sided. War is why Marlon Brando is #1 on Burt Reynolds' rumored list of actors he hated most. These stories are more than just celebrity squabbles. They reveal the fault lines in Hollywood, art versus entertainment, old school charisma versus new school method, box office glory versus critical acclaim. Burt Reynolds stood at the center of it all, a man who got the glory but always craved the respect. What do you think? Was Reynolds a misunderstood artist, or was he his own worst enemy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you love digging into the secret histories of classic Hollywood, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. So what's the final verdict on the secret hate list? As we've seen, the names on our list are all tied to well-documented conflicts and rivalries with Reynolds. The stories are real, the animosity was often palpable, and the quotes are part of Hollywood history. But the list itself? The idea of a dying Burt Reynolds whispering a final, vindictive ranking? That seems to be pure internet folklore. There's no credible evidence it ever existed. It's a great story, a narrative hook that lets us package the messy relationships of a very complicated man. The truth is, Burt Reynolds didn't need a secret list. He aired his grievances publicly for 50 years. He was a man of immense charm and even bigger insecurities. He was the biggest movie star on the planet. Yet he felt like an outsider in the world of serious art. He admitted he made huge mistakes, often driven by pride or misplaced loyalty, like choosing to make Stroker Ace with a friend instead of taking the Oscar-winning role in Terms of Endearment. The feuds we've explored are the legacy of that internal battle. They tell the story of a man who got everything he thought he wanted, only to realize it wasn't what he needed. The hate list might be a myth, but the pain, the regret, and the simmering resentment that fueled it were all too real. Burt Reynolds was a legend, not because he was perfect, but because he was fascinatingly flawed, and he wasn't afraid to let the whole world know it.